So, we are originally from Oakland, California. We moved to Arizona in the year 2000. I'm the oldest of 5. I think that my mom was born to be a mom because no matter how many of us it was very natural to her. I was 11 years old when my mom met Isaiah Patterson. I will never forget it. We walked through the door. I saw him standing in the kitchen with my mom, all hugged up on my mom. This is a 60-something-year-old man at the time. My mom was almost 30, trying to hug us and play with us, and we were just like, no.
It's nice to meet you all.
He didn't have a good vibe to him. His aura was very fake. Usually when my mom dates someone, we don't get that right off the bat.
From what I can remember, I know he came on very strong. I was just thrown off. I didn't want him touching me. I don't know if I can sense it then as a child, but I was uncomfortable. I was very uncomfortable because once he came, he never went away after that. We were stuck with him.
We didn't see the red flags right away, but slowly but surely, we definitely started seeing some of them come out. Once Isaiah moved in with us, chaos followed.
Before he moved in with us in the house, we were with her all the time. We had some hard times. We had to sleep on floors and all these other things, but it never felt bad because we were together. So it didn't feel like something was wrong. As long as we were all together, as long as my mom was there, we could be anywhere. We could sleep anywhere. It didn't matter. When Isaiah came into the picture, the dynamics completely changed. Completely. One day, I remember he and my mom were in the room, and I wanted to get to my mom, and I wanted to talk to her about something, and she was always available to me, so I just opened the door. Hey, Mom. Tried to talk to my mom. Hey, baby. And he got upset. When he was angry, I can't really describe it other than he just would kind of turn into something else. He kind of looked flustered, and then he pushed me out the door and he slammed the door in my face.
We're not doing this now.
And I remember just thinking, like, what just happened? Like, my mom would never let anyone treat us like that. So in that moment, I was shocked, I was hurt, I was upset. That was a moment where I knew I can't stand this man, like, because it was so uncalled for. And I didn't understand why he did it. I just felt like he wanted my mom all to herself.
So Isaiah was jealous of our relationship with my mom. I definitely think that he thought of her as a possession instead of a partner. I didn't like the way that he was controlling her and telling her what to do because that wasn't normal for her. We weren't used to being shut off away from our mom. That change was tough.
My little sister was the baby of the family, and she took well to Isaiah, more so because she was so young. If you gave her candy, she was your friend. So I just remember me and my sister, we were home from school. At the time, my mom wasn't home. We see a donut, and it's wrapped up in a napkin. We're kids, and we see something sweet, and we want it. I told my sister, I'm like, we should ask Isaiah for it to see if he'll let us have it. My sister goes in my mom's room and asks him for the donut, and of course, he gives it to her, and she eats it. When I see that she ate the donut, I was upset. Why would you ask him for it? You knew that I wanted some too. So I kind of tap her on her arm like that. Like, why would you do that? You knew I wanted some of that.
You were supposed to share.
Hey!
He got upset by that. And she's not crying or anything. He just rushed up to me like, don't you put your hands on her? And I'm just kind of scared. He picks me up by my arm. He's hitting me with his hand. I was terrified. And he was hitting me hard. You know, I'm crying, I'm hysterical. I didn't know how far he was gonna take it. Eventually, he stopped. I don't remember telling my mom, but I know I did tell her. She probably would have told me something like, I'll take care of it, or don't worry about it, I'll talk to him. After that incident, I definitely was more afraid of Isaiah. I stayed clear of him. When he got home, I made sure I was nowhere in sight.
This picture is a picture of my winter formal. My mom helped me pick out my dress, she helped me pick out my accessories, and she did her famous hairstyle, microwave curls, on me. That was a good day. This moment was special because Isaiah couldn't pull her away. I was able to be her baby doll that day. So I think she enjoyed that just as much as I did. That was the last time she helped me get ready for anything. Once Isaiah came, things changed because I wasn't able to be as close to my mom. Sucks because, like I said, like she helped everybody else get ready for prom and graduation and things like that, but that was it for me. That was it. There had been a couple of mice in the house. Well, my mom set out traps to catch them. She told Isaiah to dispose of them before we could see it because of our fear of them. One morning, I remember waking up and I was getting ready for school. So we're all going to the bathroom, and as soon as we walk in the bathroom and turn the lights on, immediately I noticed there's a dead mouse in the sink, and there's a dead mouse in the toilet, and there's also a dead mouse inside the tub. Instead of disposing of them, Isaiah put them inside of our bathroom. Me and my sisters, we took off running, screaming, crying. Like, we were really, shooken up by that. Isaiah was amused. He just stood in the doorway laughing. He thought that was funny. That's not normal behavior for somebody his age. So it just shows you what type of individual he is. He went out of his way to use those against us, to terrorize us.
When I learned that my mom was pregnant by Isaiah and having another baby, I was upset. I didn't think about, I'm having another sibling. I just thought, like, now we're really not going to get rid of him. Because as a kid, I would just wait for the day where they would just break up and he would just leave. And it would never happen. So when she had the baby, it was just, I was upset.
This is a picture of my mom and my baby brother, and it was Isaiah. But I scratched his face out of the picture. He didn't have any relationship with him. He didn't play with him. He didn't change him. He didn't feed him. He never even referred to him as my baby. It was that baby. During that time, I hated Isaiah's existence. I hated anything that involved him outside of my brother. I would be upset because everything I was going through, everything I felt at that time, as far as being alone and feeling like unwanted and lost, he was the cause of all of that because he took my mom away from me. At that time, all I could do was just cut him out. I do believe she feared Isaiah a little bit during that time, that a lot of times when my mom stayed away, it was to protect us. I remember one day, it was time for us to get up for school, so I got me and my siblings up and got everybody dressed. Isaiah was like, "Where's your mom?" And we was like, "We don't know." He went into a rampage. He went into her room and dragged all the furniture out piece by piece. And he pulled everything out to the front yard and started smashing it with the hammer.
I have no idea what's going on until I see him outside breaking up stuff. To me, he looked like a madman. He looked crazy. That was the first time I seen him act that way. And like, what else is he capable of? So at this point now, I'm looking at him in a different way. And I'm thinking, well, what will stop him from killing us? I think at that time, I was scared that he was going to attack Shaquaya, my sister.
When Isaiah would go on his rampages, he's looking around. He's just staring at you, or he'll make eye contact with you. And like that thought, visualizing his face still gives me chills. Because it's just pure evil. Like, he didn't have any emotion on his face. Glasses are at the tip of his nose again, and he's looking over there. This is how he looks over at everybody. When you see that demeanor, you know that he's on a rampage. Then he started heading directly towards me because I was holding the baby. And he was walking towards me with the hammer. And all of a sudden, our neighbor across the street asked him, like, "What you coming over here for?"
What do you think you're doing?
And he goes, "I'm about to bash that baby in the head because he not about to get raised by y'all." And that's when I start stepping back a little bit more.
Like hell you are.
I'm like shielding my brother. And she told him, her exact words was, "Over my dead body, you gotta get through me to get to these kids." So he just turned around. He got in his car and drove off immediately. I didn't understand why he was so angry. And it was just like the devil himself. It just seemed so evil and so dark. But looking back, I should have been scared. But the hate that I had for him didn't allow me to fear him at all. I remember one time I was home watching the baby. My mom wasn't there. He couldn't find her.
You gonna tell me where she's at?
When Isaiah couldn't find my mom, he would come to my room and he would say, "Where's your mom?" And I'll be like, "I don't know." And he'd be like, you know where she is. You know where she is, and you just lying for her.
I have no idea.
So the next thing was to pick at me because he felt like I was keeping her secret.
You wanna play that game, right?
So he took the baby and he knew that that would get a rise out of me. And I'm like, "Give me the baby back. I don't know where my mom is." I picked up this aluminum bat that I had, that I kept under my bed, and I told him, "Give me my brother back." And he's laughing and joking. It's like watching a demon take over a house.
Can you even swing that?
You've claimed that you were gonna, or threatened to smash him in the head with a hammer so that he wasn't raised by us. We didn't know what Isaiah was capable of, and I wasn't trying to find out with my brother. We had no clue what was coming next. No clue. Isaiah came in and took him because that was his way of antagonizing me because he couldn't find my mom. He ran outside with the baby. I chased after him to get my brother because I didn't know what he was capable of with the baby.
Put my brother down.
So me knowing that he loved his car, I turned around and I went to his car and I said, "Give me my brother. I'm gonna smash the windows on this car." And that got his attention.
Let him go.
I just remember thinking, Shakoya, please don't. At that point, I knew it was serious and I felt like my sister was in danger. I was scared. I didn't know how it was going to end.
And then he stopped and came closer to me and said, "If you touch my car, I'm going to jail."
You think I'm afraid to catch a case?
I was more angry than fearful. So I'm like, "Give me my brother with the bat up. Give me my brother, or I'm about to bash these windows out of this car." He put the baby down and he took off looking for my mom again. I picked him up immediately and we just went inside the house. I definitely did underestimate Isaiah. I wasn't fully aware of what he was capable of.
There was a time that I can remember. We walked into the house and my mom was sitting kind of at this folding table. She used to play this card game. Her and Isaiah were playing.
Hey, Mom.
And, you know, I'm like hugging her, kissing her, whatever. And then I see in her mouth, her front tooth is missing.
Mom? Your tooth.
And I'm just like, what happened? And she's just like, "Oh, baby headbutted me and knocked my tooth out."
Just an accident. I'm all good.
I believed her, never questioned it, never thought about it again. Later on, me and Shakoya, we were talking, I brought that up, and Shakoya was just like, "He didn't knock her tooth out. Isaiah punched her in her mouth and knocked her tooth out." And I was like, what? I'm shocked. I never heard that, never knew at that time that he was abusing her. It hurt to know that she was going through those sort of things back then at that time, and she was hiding it. She didn't want us to be scared, and my mom was always so happy, so I think she just didn't want to portray anything different. Okay.
I think my mom wanted us to feel like everything was still the same. She didn't want us to feel her pain or know what was going on. My mom raised us to fight for ourselves, defend ourselves. So she couldn't show us that she was being beat. That would go against everything that she tried to teach us.
She didn't want anybody to try to speak up to Isaiah on her behalf because she knew it wouldn't go well. I feel like my mom did fear him. I don't know if she feared him because of what he was capable of with her or us or family. I'm not 100% sure, but there was definitely some fear there. But when you go through it every single day, all day, and there's no escaping this person, like, that's hell. That's hell. I remember going into my mom's room, which her bathroom was connected to the room. And then my mom was inside the tub. And I see Isaiah. Isaiah was standing over her, like he was standing outside the tub watching over her as she, bathed. And my mom responded to him like, I got this. I'm a grown woman. I know how to clean myself. I was just like, what kind of situation is this? Like, who does that? Bath is usually sanctuary where people go to exhale and to unwind from a long day. And here he is taking those moments from my mom by standing over her. She didn't have any privacy. She didn't have a moment to herself. She didn't have the freedom to relax or that little bit of privacy that most people get. This wasn't a one-time thing. Anytime my mom took a bath, Isaiah was right there monitoring her, how she was bathing. Anywhere my mom went, Isaiah went. Isaiah did not want my mom to have a life of her own. And so that was his way of controlling everything. But normally, my mom would have put a stop to it a long time ago. So that's why I never really understood why she let him have so much control over her. And again, later on, when finding out the details, it makes a little bit more sense that it was intimidation and fear and control. At this time, Isaiah was the breadwinner. So when he got upset with my mom, he would not pay the bills. He would not put food in the house. So with him not paying the bills, we were left without water. We were left without electricity. And in the Arizona heat, that's a tough time. She'll ask him, like, why did you let the water get cut off? Why didn't you pay the bill? He didn't care about the baby being there during these times when there was no water or electricity. We were in the dark. We were without food. We were without water. Isaiah will come back to the house and see that and leave. At this point in time, when we had no water, food, or electricity, that was the beginning of the end. I believe he knew that my mom was at her breaking point, but we had no idea what he was going to do or who he was going to take it out on. But we knew it was coming. After the eviction, we were all split up as a family. My mom and the baby stayed with one of my aunts, and I stayed with one of my other aunts. And my two sisters were in California, and my brother was in California with his dad as well. I missed my mom. I did not like being away from her and not living with her, but it was such a relief not to have to deal with him day to day. I felt like it was over, like it was done. There's nothing else you can do. There's nothing else you can say. I remember my mom coming to visit me, and when I saw my mom, I was very concerned about her appearance. My mom was super, super like bony, and her face was sunken in, like she had dark circles. It does seem like my mom was going through hell because her kids were taken away from her. We're all split up everywhere. She's still dealing with Isaiah's antics, with him stalking her, showing up to my aunt's house, showing up wherever she is. It just seems like she was just drained.
You sure you okay?
I'm fine. I was concerned that she was letting Isaiah suck the life out of her. I told her that I wanted to actually like spend the night with her.
This weekend, you and me.
And she told me, yeah, she was gonna come get me. She told me she was gonna come get me. And I was looking forward to wanting to spend a night with her because it had been a while. So she told me she'll see me on Friday. So we had plans to just watch movies and eat and hang out. Before she left, I gave her a hug. And I was like, okay, I'll see you on Friday. I was like, Mom, just don't forget to come get me. And she was like, I'm not. I'll be back to get you. I never talked to her again. I never got to go spend a night with her. The morning of March 17, 2006, I got up for school. In the car, on the way to school, my cousin got a phone call from her mom.
Hello?
All of a sudden, I noticed my cousin's face because I'm sitting behind her and she's driving, but I can see her in the rearview mirror.
What?
And I can see her face, and she was like, Mom, no, and she started crying. And I was like, what happened? And she was like, Quay's right here. She just looked at me in the mirror, and I was like, is it the baby? And she was like, no. I was like, is it my mom? And she was like, yeah, and I just lost it. Like, I will never forget that. I completely, like, just kicked, screamed, punched. I just could not believe it. And I was like, what happened? What happened? What happened? And she was like, we don't know yet. We don't know. And I was like, did Isaiah do it? And she said, yes. And I just felt helpless again. Like, oh my God, like, I just wanted to get to her.
This guy was just beating the heck out of this girl, and he was yelling, help me, help me.
I found out that night, Isaiah was blowing my mom up all day and night and begging her to come over. He told her he wanted to see his son. When she got over there, he began to beat her. And my mom was trying to fight back. She ran out of the apartment. She was beating on the doors of all the neighbors. Nobody opened the door.
911 emergency.
Yes, there's a woman who is screaming at the top of her voice, and there's a little boy who's saying, oh, Daddy, oh, Daddy.
Isaiah came out of the house with the knife, and my mom saw him, and she took off running, and she slipped on the wet grass. He stabbed her continuously, all over, from her arm to her face, her neck, all over her body. He continuously did this until one of the neighbors opened the door and yelled, "Hey, stop." He looked at the neighbor and he said, "That's what happens when you try to turn a hoe into a housewife." And my mom collapsed right there from her wounds. Isaiah walked back into the apartment where my brother was. He called 911 and told them, y'all need to get here quick because I just cut my son's mom. I have my 3-year-old son here, and if you don't hurry up, I'm gonna do something else.
Then you already committed a violent act?
Yep.
What did you do?
With my wife, and we have a child together. I cut her with a butcher knife, but I know that she's been treating me wrong too long. I couldn't take no more.
So he stayed on the phone until the police got there.
Okay, the police at the door now, so I gotta hang up.
Okay.
I believe Isaiah stayed there after calling 911 because he knew there would be street justice. And I know for a fact that's not what he wanted. There was nowhere for him to go. The only thing that was left for him to do was to turn himself in. This is a picture of Isaiah. This was a picture from the day of the murder. That's the face that he made all the time when he was gonna cause hell. The only difference is those glasses are not at the tip of his nose and he's not looking over at you. There was no change to his demeanor, except when he laughed, when he was terrorizing somebody. That's the only time you gotta smile, or a laugh, a chuckle, or anything. But other than that, this is how this man looked every day. That look, there's nothing there, just pure evil.
It's hard to see this man. I just have nothing but rage for this man. He definitely doesn't look remorseful. He doesn't look like he did anything that he feels bad about. I honestly think he turned himself in because my mom's brothers, my uncles would have been looking for him. He's a coward. Isaiah's a coward.
After my mom's funeral, I felt numb. The best way to describe it is I felt alone. I felt alone. I felt lost. I felt like I felt worthless because the only person that like spoke light into me was gone. I felt misunderstood. I felt like that for many, many years. And I still feel that way, a lot of those ways. I still feel alone. I still feel lost. I don't feel worthless. Nobody can ever make me feel worthless. But I definitely feel alone. I don't go to the gravesite often. It puts me in an emotional state where I can't get out of it. I'll go and the whole day I'm just emotional. I feel nauseous and sick to my stomach all day for the rest of the day. I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm upset. All those emotions come flooding back. And I can't get rid of it. It takes a lot of work and it takes time for me to get out of that headspace. Because it's not easy to get out of, or we don't really know how to navigate those emotions. I guess that's the best way to describe it. Because we have all these emotions and we don't know what to do with them. We don't know who to talk to help us get through them. It's just like, we're upset, we're hurt, and we have to sit in those feelings. And we avoid going to the cemetery for those reasons.
This is Shakoya and I at my mom's 50th birthday party memorial that we had for her. It was meant to be all about her. The guest list was meant to be who she would want there, what music she'd want to hear, what drink she'd want to drink. We wanted it to be like, if she threw a birthday party, this is how it would go. If I could feel her in that room, her presence was felt for sure. My mom, her only voice now is us, her kids. She left behind 5. It's a lot of voices, so I want to keep her memory alive. I want people to know who she was before it all happened. And I want people to know how it happened, and I just feel like it's a part of my grieving process.
I understand my mom more, and I appreciate her, and I applaud her. She have 5 beautiful gifts that she gave to the world, and she did great with all of us for the short time that we were with her. She was just all around awesome. All around awesome. I believe after this interview, Isaiah Patterson is no longer a factor in my day-to-day struggle to heal. I'm leaving that here. He no longer has any power over me. With how I feel at this moment, I'm good. I'm good. There's nothing else he can do to me. Isaiah is a horrible memory of the past. That's what he is.
My mother was strangled so severely her larynx was snapped in half. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't have a brother. I don't have any photos of him. I don't have any good stories of him. I hope God does not have mercy on his soul.
The year is 1946, and for the residents of Texarkana, a bustling city straddling the border of Texas and Arkansas, the world is supposed to be returning to a state of normalcy. The Second World War has come to a definitive close, and the men who were once deployed in the dark theaters of Europe and the Pacific have returned home to their families, their jobs, and their sweethearts. There is a palpable sense of relief in the air, a collective exhale that feels like the beginning of a long-awaited golden era. People are beginning to trade their rationing coupons for the comforts of domestic life, and the streets are filled with the sounds of recovery, the hum of engines, the laughter of children, and the soft, lingering notes of jazz spilling out from radios. But in the quiet peripheries of this growing city, where the pavement yields to the soft, unforgiving soil of the rural landscape, a different kind of history is being written in the shadows. There is something inherently fragile about the peace of 1946. It is a peace built on the shaky foundations of post-war adjustment, where the silence of the night no longer carries the threat of enemy fire, but instead harbors something far more intimate, something that defies the logic of a civilized society. As the sun dips below the horizon, pulling the curtain of dusk over the sprawling woods and the isolated stretches of gravel known as lovers' lanes, the city undergoes a metamorphosis. It is here, far from the watchful eyes of law enforcement and the comforting glow of porch lights, that a predator finds his opening. The atmosphere is damp, thick with the scent of pine needles and decaying leaves, and the air is heavy with an anticipation that most would mistake for the natural stillness of the countryside. But for those few who find themselves alone in the dark, the stillness is not peace. It is a cage. In this landscape of shifting darkness, a figure emerges, or perhaps he has always been there, waiting for the right moment to claim the silence. He is not a man of flesh and blood in the eyes of the public at this stage. He is a phantom, a construct of terror that lacks a face, a name, or an identifiable motive. He is a predator who understands the geography of fear, choosing the nights when the moon is bright enough to reveal the outlines of vehicles tucked away in the trees, but not bright enough to betray his own identity. He moves with a calculated, cold efficiency that suggests a mind devoid of empathy, operating in the spaces between the ordinary lives of the townspeople. His presence is felt first as an intrusion, the snapping of a twig, the sudden vibration of a vehicle under pressure, the shattering of glass that cuts through the nocturnal symphony of crickets and wind. When he arrives, he brings with him a sense of absolute finality. The people of Texarkana do not yet know it, but they are living through the birth of a legend that will haunt the American consciousness for decades to come. This is a story about the intersection of vulnerability and inexplicable violence, where the innocence of a generation is stripped away in the span of a few brutal months. The Phantom Killer does not simply commit crimes, he disrupts the reality of the city. He turns the act of courting, an age-old tradition of connection and intimacy, into a terminal hazard. By targeting the very places where young people go to express their love and hope for the future, he strikes at the heart of the community's optimism, leaving behind a vacuum of fear that the police, for all their efforts, will find impossible to fill. The psychological impact of his arrival is immediate and profound. Imagine, if you will, the creeping realization that the dark woods bordering your hometown are no longer safe. Imagine the shift in the social pulse of the city as the whispers grow louder, as the laughter at the local diner dies down, and as the locks on the doors are checked with a frantic, repetitive anxiety. Every shadow becomes a potential threat. Every stranger is scrutinized with a mixture of suspicion and terror. The Phantom Killer operates on a level of primal terror that strips away the veneer of modernity, reminding the residents of Texarkana that beneath the progress of the post-war world, there exists a darkness that cannot be reasoned with or contained. As we prepare to delve into the specific details of these nights, it is essential to remember that these are not merely cold entries in a police file. They are moments where real lives were irrevocably fractured, where the silence of the Texas borderlands became the witness to a series of events that would leave the city forever changed, looking over its shoulder, waiting for a shadow that never truly went away. The stage is set, the moon is rising, and the predator is moving through the trees, closing the distance between the known world and the void. To understand the terror that gripped Texarkana, one must first understand the social fabric of the city in early 1946. It was a place defined by its dual identity, straddling the state line between Texas and Arkansas, creating a unique jurisdictional ambiguity that would later become a logistical nightmare for law enforcement. The population was comprised of families who had survived the Great Depression and the global cataclysm of the Second World War. There was a desperate, almost palpable desire to return to normalcy, to build homes, to raise children, and to experience the simple joys that had been deferred for years. For the youth of Texarkana, the teenagers and young adults who had come of age during the war, the world was finally opening up. They were eager to reclaim their futures, and the primary vehicle for this social exploration was the automobile. In 1946, the car was more than just a mode of transportation. It was a sanctuary of privacy, a rolling parlor where young couples could escape the watchful, often stern eyes of their parents and the cramped confines of their small homes. The geography of their courtship was dictated by the landscape. In the rural outskirts of Texarkana, there were stretches of road and clearings nestled within the pines that became known colloquially as lovers' lanes. These were not officially designated parks or public spaces. They were arbitrary points of convenience, a gravel pull-off near a farmhouse, a secluded spot deep within a wooded trail, or an unpaved road that wound through the dense, swampy thickets. To the young couples, these locations offered the only respite from the demands of their daily lives. They were places where the hum of the city faded into the background, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the gentle night breeze. These victims were not reckless. They were merely following the patterns of their generation, seeking intimacy in an era that provided very few opportunities for it. They believed themselves to be invisible, shielded by the darkness and the isolation of the countryside, unaware that they were actually silhouettes against a background of absolute vulnerability. The victims of the Phantom Killer were a cross-section of this optimistic but fragile post-war generation. They were students, laborers, and sweethearts. Some were engaged to be married, planning their lives around the assumption that the world would be waiting for them the next morning. They shared a common innocence, a belief that the violence they had heard about on the radio or read about in newspapers belonged to distant lands, to the battlefields of Europe or the islands of the Pacific, not to the dirt roads of their own hometown. When they drove out to these secluded spots, they were operating under the assumption that the greatest threat they might face was the disapproval of their elders or the discomfort of being caught. They did not factor in the presence of a predator who saw these very attributes, the isolation, the stillness, the reliance on the darkness, as the perfect ingredients for an atrocity. One must consider the environment itself as a silent witness to their vulnerability. The area around Texarkana was, and is, a place of deep shadows and dense vegetation. The pines grow thick here, their needles creating a soft, sound-muffling carpet that swallows the noise of a footfall, making it easy for someone to approach without being heard. The roads, winding and often unpaved, were difficult to navigate for anyone unfamiliar with the terrain, yet the Phantom Killer moved through this space with a confidence that suggests an intimate knowledge of the environment. He knew where the lanes were, he knew where the couples would park, and he knew that once the engine was cut, the sound of their intimacy, the low music from the radio, the soft murmurs of conversation, would mask the sound of his approach. He turned the very geography of their safety into the architecture of their trap. As the weeks passed in the spring of 1946, the reputation of these lovers' lanes began to shift in the public consciousness. What was once viewed with a sense of romantic curiosity started to be perceived with a primal dread. The realization began to dawn on the community that their children were not just meeting in private, they were meeting in a hunting ground. The vulnerability was not merely physical, it was social. The town was small enough that everyone felt connected to the victims in some way. If they were not related by blood or marriage, they were neighbors, classmates, or acquaintances. The tragedy of the Texarkana Moonlight murders was not just that young people were being killed, it was that the mechanism of their murder was an affront to the very idea of a safe community. It shattered the belief that danger was something that could be avoided by staying off the roads or being home at a reasonable hour. The Phantom Killer, by operating on the outskirts, reminded them that the boundary between their safe, domestic lives and the chaos of the void was porous and easily breached. The victims of the February and March attacks were perhaps the most jarring because they established the pattern of the threat. Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry, for example, were simply doing what hundreds of other couples did every weekend. Their survival, while a relief, served as the initial warning sign, a grim harbinger of the violence that was to follow. Mary Jean Larry's survival is of particular historical significance, as her testimony provided the authorities with the only tangible description of the perpetrator. Her account of the masked figure, the white bag, the two-eye holes, the menacing presence, became the defining image of the Phantom Killer. It was an image that stripped away the humanity of the attacker, reducing him to an iconic, featureless monster. This mask would become a totem of fear, a psychological hook that would pull the entire town into a state of collective psychosis. The victims were not just statistics, they were individuals with dreams and futures that were extinguished in seconds. Polly and Moore and Richard Griffin, killed in March, were the first to pay the ultimate price. Their deaths marked the moment when the community shifted from concern to terror. When their bodies were discovered, it wasn't just the fact of their murder that stunned the public, but the clinical, almost mechanical nature of the execution. They had been killed not in the heat of a struggle, but with a deliberate, cold precision that suggested they had been hunted. The realization that there was a predator capable of moving between their lives with such ease created a pervasive atmosphere of paranoia. Every car seen parked on a dark road was now suspect, every person seen walking alone was a potential target, and every shadow in the rearview mirror was a threat. As we look at the setting of these crimes, we are forced to grapple with the reality of the post-war environment. There was a sense of transition in 1946 that we often overlook in our modern, retrospective gaze. The veterans were trying to integrate back into a society that had changed in their absence. There was a tension between the traditional, conservative values of the rural South and the modern, mobile lifestyle that the automobile promised. The lovers' lanes were the manifestation of this tension, an attempt by the youth to carve out their own space, a private sphere of independence that existed on the fringes of the adult world. The Phantom Killer, by targeting this specific sphere, acted as a dark mirror to this tension, destroying the very autonomy that the young people were attempting to exercise. He was the ultimate gatekeeper, enforcing a brutal, bloody silence upon those who dared to step into the darkness to find a moment of peace. The psychological weight on the community became a defining feature of life in Texarkana. The townspeople were forced to confront the fact that they could not protect their own. The traditional mechanisms of order, the law, the social norms, the vigilance of the family, were rendered impotent against an assailant who struck from the shadows and retreated back into the void. This led to a profound shift in the way people interacted with their environment. The freedom of the night was revoked. The darkness was no longer a place of comfort, but a place of peril. Families began to hoard weapons, barricade their homes, and enforce strict, self-imposed curfews. The social life of the town, once centered on the freedom of the weekend nights, was replaced by a hollow, strained atmosphere of waiting. They were waiting for the next attack, waiting for the police to act, waiting for the monster to be unmasked. But as the months wore on, the silence of the authorities only grew deeper, and the frustration of the public began to boil over. The Phantom Killer had not just committed crimes, he had successfully colonized the psyche of an entire city, turning every resident into a captive of their own fear, forever watching the woods, forever listening for the sound of a shattering window, and forever remembering the night when the light of the moon became the beacon of their destruction. The sequence of violence that defined the spring of 1946 began under the cover of a cold February night, an evening that would serve as the opening chapter of a nightmare for the residents of Texarkana. On the night of February 22nd, the city was settling into the quiet rhythms of the post-war period, unaware that the darkness surrounding its outskirts was about to become the stage for a series of harrowing encounters. Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry, a young couple seeking the fleeting privacy that only a parked car could provide, drove out to a secluded stretch of road, a classic lover's lane tucked away from the main thoroughfares. They sought nothing more than a brief respite from the pressures of their daily lives, a moment of connection away from the prying eyes of the world. Yet, as the engine fell silent and the ambient sounds of the night, the chirping of insects and the distant rustle of the pines, took over, they were effectively sealing their fate in a trap designed by a predator who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The attack was sudden and utterly devoid of mercy. A figure materialized from the shadows, his presence signaled not by a voice or a warning, but by the jarring, violent action of an intruder. The assailant, draped in a coat that seemed to blend seamlessly into the darkness, approached the vehicle with an intensity that left no room for negotiation. He was wearing a mask, a coarse white bag with two jagged, hand-cut eye holes, which rendered him faceless and stripped away any trace of human empathy. He did not engage in conversation. He demanded compliance through the blunt, terrifying force of a .32 caliber pistol. Jimmy Hollis, in a desperate attempt to protect himself and his companion, was met with a brutal physical assault that left him with a fractured skull. He was beaten into submission, his resistance crushed by the cold metal of the pistol being used as a weapon, his consciousness slipping away as the situation spiraled into an unthinkable horror. Mary Jean Larey, the sole witness to the depths of this man's cruelty, was forced to undergo an ordeal that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She was dragged from the vehicle and subjected to a campaign of terror and sexual violence, her cries stifled by the desolate location of the encounter and the sheer, overwhelming presence of her attacker. The Phantom, as he would eventually come to be known, operated with a calculated efficiency, his movements purposeful and his intent clear. He took what he wanted, he inflicted the maximum amount of pain, and he did so with the knowledge that he was entirely in control of the narrative. When the attacker finally vanished back into the woods, leaving the injured couple in the wreckage of their evening, he did not just leave behind victims, he left behind the first fragments of a profile. Mary Jean's description of the masked man, the white sack, the predatory movements, the cold, metallic precision of his weaponry, would provide the only tangible link to the monster stalking the night, a chilling portrait that would soon become the focal point of the city's collective anxiety. The reprieve that followed this initial attack was short-lived, a mere lull in a storm that was only just beginning to gather force. On the night of March 24th, the cycle of violence resumed with a chilling escalation that signaled the Phantom's shift from random opportunism to cold-blooded execution. Richard Griffin and Polly and Moore, another young couple whose only crime was their pursuit of intimacy, were found dead in their parked vehicle, a scene that confirmed the absolute gravity of the threat facing Texarkana. Unlike the encounter with Hollis and Larry, there were no survivors here to recount the horror, only the silent, damning evidence left behind in the interior of the car. They had been killed in their seats, executed at close range with a precision that bordered on the clinical. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle, suggesting that the predator had achieved the element of surprise so completely that his victims had been unable to mount even a rudimentary defense. The discovery of their bodies, discovered by chance in the cold, unforgiving light of the following morning, shattered the lingering hope that the February attack had been an isolated incident. The reality began to sink into the marrow of the town's bones. A killer was actively hunting in their midst, and he was refining his methods with every passing moon. The scene inside the vehicle was a tableau of senseless destruction, the blood-stained upholstery, the broken glass, and the stillness of the victims who had been expecting a romantic evening stood in stark, devastating contrast to the reality of the violence that had been visited upon them. This was not a crime of passion, it was a performance of power, a deliberate act of annihilation that served to amplify the fear already radiating through the city. The community began to understand that the Phantom was not merely an intruder. He was a hunter who recognized no boundaries, a figure who could appear out of the darkness, impose his will upon the innocent, and vanish without a trace, leaving behind only the cold, hard reality of death. The trajectory of the Phantom's violence reached a terrifying intensity on April 14th, a night that would prove to be one of the darkest in the city's history. Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker were young people with their entire lives ahead of them, individuals who were well known in the local community and whose deaths sent a shockwave of grief and rage through Texarkana. The circumstances of their discovery only served to deepen the mystery and heighten the panic. Paul Martin, having been struck down by 4 separate gunshots, was found discarded on the roadside like an unwanted object, his life stolen in a barrage of lead that underscored the killer's disregard for human dignity. Betty Jo Booker, however, was not found immediately. Her body was discovered in the dense, suffocating embrace of the forest, a sight that was both a crime scene and a testament to the predator's intimate knowledge of the terrain. Her hands, clenched in a final, futile gesture of resistance, and the bullet wound that had pierced her heart, were the final, tragic details of a life extinguished by the cold, calculating hand of the Phantom. The brutality of these murders went beyond the physical. It was the psychological toll that began to tear the city apart. These were not just anonymous targets. They were people who walked the streets of Texarkana, who attended the same schools, and whose absence created a gaping hole in the fabric of the community. The fact that the killer was able to dispose of his victims in such disparate locations, and that he could do so while navigating the rural labyrinth of the borderlands, suggested a level of familiarity that furthered the sense of unease. Everyone was now a suspect, and every quiet corner of the town became a potential crime scene. The Phantom was no longer just a figure in a mask. He was the embodiment of the darkness that had settled over the city, a relentless presence that dictated the movements of the residents and forced them into a state of perpetual, agonizing vigilance. As the news of the April murders spread, the city of Texarkana ceased to function as a normal community. The streets emptied as the sun began to wane, the storefronts were boarded up with an intensity that suggested a siege, and the silence of the night was no longer the peaceful quiet of the countryside, but the strained, heavy silence of fear. The Phantom had achieved a total victory over the city's peace of mind. He had turned the act of existing within the borders of Texarkana into a high-stakes gamble where the odds were stacked entirely in his favor. Every shadow held the shape of his mask, every rustle of the wind sounded like his approach, and every quiet moment was shadowed by the lingering, persistent knowledge that the killer was still out there, lurking in the periphery of their lives, waiting for the moon to rise once more. The incidents were not just events. They were a systematic dismantling of the social order, a process of erosion that left the citizens of Texarkana exposed, vulnerable, and forever waiting for the sound of a shattering window or the sudden, sharp report of a gunshot to shatter their fragile, temporary illusions of safety. The brutality of these acts, the cold, detached efficiency with which the victims were hunted and dispatched, remains the defining characteristic of this era of terror, a time when the darkness of the borderlands became synonymous with the name of the unknown monster who haunted them, the Phantom who lived in the spaces where no one dared to look. The descent of Texarkana into a state of siege was not merely a reaction to the individual acts of violence, but a consequence of the total failure of the existing power structures to provide security or clarity. As the spring of 1946 progressed, the institutional response to the Phantom killer shifted from localized law enforcement efforts to a desperate, multifaceted dragnet that mobilized every available resource within the region. The city found itself trapped in a jurisdictional quagmire. Situated on the border of Texas and Arkansas, the investigation was hampered by a lack of coordinated command. Each crime scene was scrutinized by different agencies with different protocols, resulting in a fractured intelligence picture that allowed the perpetrator to slip through the gaps in their coverage. The realization that they were dealing with a serial offender, one who possessed an unnerving awareness of local patrol routes and rural topography, forced the hands of the authorities, leading to the deployment of the Texas Rangers. The arrival of Captain Manuel Lone Wolf Gonzalez, a figure of legendary status within Texas law enforcement, was meant to be the turning point, the moment when the forces of order would finally assert control over the chaos. His presence brought a temporary sense of confidence to a demoralized public as he immediately began to implement aggressive, unconventional tactics designed to flush out an assailant who refused to play by the rules of conventional crime. Gonzalez understood that the Phantom was not responding to traditional deterrence. The standard police presence was useless against a predator who struck in the dead of night at locations miles removed from the main roads. In response, the Rangers and local deputies began to transform the geography of the Lovers' Lanes into a series of elaborate, high-stakes traps. They utilized bait cars, parked in vulnerable, isolated clearings, with officers hidden in the surrounding brush, waiting in the stifling heat for any sign of a masked figure. These stakeouts were grueling, exhausting operations that stretched over weeks, with officers maintaining absolute silence in the dark, watching the moonlight for the slightest deviation in the shadows. The pressure was suffocating. The officers knew that if they missed their target, the Phantom would be free to strike again, and the weight of that responsibility was felt in every hour of the long, tension-filled watches. The investigation became an all-encompassing obsession for the authorities as they sifted through thousands of tips, questioned hundreds of individuals, and tracked every lead, no matter how tenuous or bizarre, in a frantic attempt to unmask the monster. Yet, for all their tactical ingenuity, the Phantom remained invisible. He seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to bypass their cordons, striking at sites that were not being monitored or moving through the terrain with such stealth that he remained undetected even when law enforcement was mere miles away. The investigative process was marred by a series of agonizing dead ends and false starts that pushed the community toward the brink of total paranoia. Every suspicious character was reported, every neighbor was eyed with skepticism, and the distinction between a harmless eccentric and a cold-blooded killer became increasingly blurred in the eyes of an enraged and terrified public. The authorities struggled to maintain objectivity as the clamor for an arrest grew louder by the day. They brought in hundreds of men for questioning, subjecting them to grueling interrogations that yielded nothing but frustration and a growing list of grievances among the populace. The search for the perpetrator became an exercise in futility, as every piece of physical evidence was either too ambiguous or entirely absent. The mask, the only constant in the victims' accounts, was a phantom itself, a piece of fabric that could be discarded in a second, leaving the police with no fingerprints, no DNA, and no reliable physical profile. The investigation was not just fighting the killer, it was fighting the limitations of their own era's forensic technology and the sheer, vast expanse of the Texas-Arkansas borderlands. As the weeks turned into months, the failure to produce a breakthrough began to take a toll on the morale of the investigative team, who could see the fear in the eyes of the citizens and knew that they were failing in their most fundamental duty. The knot tightened around the city as the Phantom began to anticipate their maneuvers. There were instances where it appeared the killer was mocking the law, choosing to strike in areas that had only recently been cleared by patrol units, or avoiding the very traps that the Rangers had spent days preparing. This uncanny ability to navigate the police response suggested to many that the killer might be someone with an intimate knowledge of police procedures or, at the very least, an individual who is closely monitoring the authorities' own movements. This suspicion, whispered in the backrooms of local businesses and at the kitchen tables of suburban homes, added a layer of betrayal to the existing terror. The thought that the Phantom might be one of their own, a neighbor, a veteran returning from the front, or even someone who walked among them during the day, was a prospect that the community found almost impossible to stomach. The investigation turned inward, with the police investigating their own ranks and local citizens forming informal, often dangerous neighborhood watch groups that began to patrol the streets with loaded rifles. These groups were not sanctioned by the law, and their actions frequently bordered on vigilantism, with several instances of near confrontations between armed citizens and confused deputies that could have easily turned into further tragedy. The lack of a centralized command and the persistent jurisdictional friction meant that the investigation was constantly hindered by delays, disagreements, and a profound lack of communication between the various agencies involved. The Texas Rangers were operating under a different philosophy than the local Arkansas police, and this lack of unity was exploited by the killer. There was no single repository for the evidence collected from the multiple crime scenes, and as a result, patterns that might have been identified by a coordinated multi-state task force were overlooked or minimized. The investigation was a process of reacting to the killer's latest atrocity rather than predicting his next move, a state of perpetual defensiveness that left the police constantly chasing ghosts. The frustration of the public peaked during the summer of 1946 as the attacks suddenly ceased, leaving the investigators in a vacuum of silence. The absence of further victims did not bring a sense of closure. Instead, it brought an even more profound sense of unease. The Phantom had not been caught, he had not been killed, and he had not been identified. He had simply stopped, leaving the authorities to grapple with the knowledge that their best efforts had resulted in nothing: no arrests, no definitive suspect, and no explanation for the trail of blood he had left across their land. The investigative process left behind a legacy of unresolved tension that would persist for decades. For the officers who had walked the woods, who had sat in the stifling silence of the stakeout cars, and who had stood over the bodies of the victims, the failure to solve the Texarkana moonlight murders was a wound that never fully healed. They had seen the true face of human darkness in the middle of a mundane, post-war American landscape, and they had been powerless to contain it. The investigative reports were archived, the evidence was boxed away, and the town attempted to move on, but the failure to solve the crimes left a permanent mark on the collective memory of Texarkana. It was a failure of the system to protect its own, a realization that in the face of such calculated, inexplicable evil, even the most capable and dedicated individuals could be rendered entirely helpless. The Phantom had succeeded where the law had failed. He had dictated the terms of the encounter, he had maintained his anonymity, and he had forced the most powerful authorities in the region to stand by in total, absolute impotence. As the investigators packed up their gear and withdrew from the borderlands, they left behind a city that was forever changed, forever looking at the woods with a lingering, hollowed-out skepticism, and forever wondering if the man in the white mask was still among them, watching from the shadows, hidden by the very geography that had once been their home. The search was over, but the question remained, a jagged, open sore that no amount of time could fully mend, a mystery that would defy every attempt at resolution and stand as a monument to the limitations of human justice in the face of an impossible, faceless terror. The judicial and investigative silence that followed the cessation of the Phantom's attacks in the summer of 1946 was, in many ways, more harrowing than the violence itself. For a community that had been held hostage by a faceless entity, the lack of a grand trial, the absence of a gavel pounding down a verdict, and the failure to place a name upon the monster created a profound, lingering void. There was no theatrical courtroom confrontation where the mask would be ripped away, no agonizing cross-examination of a killer in the stand, and no sense of closure for the families who had waited for justice to restore their sense of order. Instead, the aftermath of the Texarkana Moonlight murders was characterized by a judicial vacuum, a space where the heavy weight of suspicion hung in the air for years, shifting from one man to another without ever finding a permanent home. The law, which had once been the final arbiter of truth, found itself unable to speak. The files grew thick with the testimonies of hundreds of men, drifters, veterans, local residents, and outsiders, but not one among them could be definitively chained to the evidence. The frustration of the prosecutors was matched only by the exhaustion of the police. They had pursued the truth across the borderlands with a fervor that bordered on the fanatical, yet they were left with nothing but shadows. Without a definitive suspect to haul into a courtroom, the narrative of justice in Texarkana splintered into 1,000 disparate theories. In the absence of a trial, the townspeople became the jury, and the grocery stores and front porches became the courtrooms where reputations were shredded and accusations flew with reckless abandon. Men who had been identified as potential suspects in the early, frantic days of the investigation found their lives irrevocably scarred by the accusation. One such individual, often cited in the fringes of a case, became a permanent target of local scrutiny, his every movement monitored by the suspicious eyes of his neighbors. This judicial failure forced the community to confront the uncomfortable reality that justice, in the face of an enigma, is often an unattainable luxury. The legal machinery, designed to handle the tangible and the provable, was entirely incapable of processing the phantom-like nature of a predator who left no fingerprints, no discarded belongings, and no clear motive. The lack of a court case meant that the victims were never afforded the public recognition of their suffering through the lens of a successful prosecution. They remained frozen in time as the subjects of an unsolved tragedy, their deaths marked only by the absence of an ending. As the years drifted by, the pressure to secure a conviction evolved from a necessity of public safety into a desperate hunger for historical resolution. Periodic waves of interest would sweep through the state, prompting the reopening of old files and the re-interviewing of surviving witnesses, but every attempt to force a breakthrough collapsed under the weight of time. Memories, once sharp and visceral, grew clouded by the passage of decades. Witnesses passed away, and the physical evidence, once so carefully guarded, began to lose its potency. The judicial process, which requires the rigorous application of facts to establish laws, could find no purchase on a case that was composed almost entirely of atmosphere and speculation. There were no smoking guns, no DNA to be extracted from the forgotten threads of a discarded mask, and no digital footprints to track through the archives of the past. The courts remained silent because the state could not meet the burden of proof, and in that silence, the legend of the Phantom Killer only grew, unencumbered by the dry, procedural realities of a criminal trial. This lack of judicial closure had a corrosive effect on the collective psyche of the borderlands. Whenever a new crime occurred in the region, the shadow of the phantom was inevitably invoked, a testament to the fact that the ghost of 1946 had never been fully exorcised. The inability to reach a verdict meant that the city was forced to live with an open wound, a constant reminder that evil had walked their streets and had escaped entirely unscathed. There were no appeals, no death row testimonies, and no penitent confessions to offer up for public consumption. Instead, the phantom remained a permanent occupant of the city's subconscious, a figure who had successfully cheated the scales of justice by refusing to be caught, identified, or made accountable. The families of the victims were left to carry the heavy burden of what if and why not, navigating a world that offered them no satisfaction, no retribution, and no official acknowledgement of the magnitude of their loss. They were the casualties of a system that had been outmaneuvered by a predator who operated outside the boundaries of human law. Even when, years later, various law enforcement agencies would propose new suspects, some based on coerced confessions, others on circumstantial links, the judicial system remained appropriately, albeit frustratingly, cautious. Without the bedrock of concrete proof, the courts refused to entertain the theater of a show trial, recognizing that to imprison an innocent man would be to add one more horror to the already bloated list of the Phantom's legacy. This adherence to legal standards, while objectively correct, served only to increase the agony of the survivors. They craved a finality that the law could not provide, a definitive moment where the story would be closed and the box lid shut. But the law, in its cold and distant way, does not provide endings. It only provides verdicts, and without the raw material for a verdict, it remains mute. This forced the city to internalize the mystery, to turn the Phantom into a local totem of the unanswerable, a figure who belonged less to the annals of criminal law and more to the darker folklore of the Texas-Arkansas border. The consequence of this judicial vacuum is that the story of Texarkana is not a story of justice served, but a story of justice suspended. It remains a case study in the limitations of the human effort to categorize and control chaos. The judicial proceedings that never happened have become, in a paradoxical sense, the most important part of the case's legacy, because they highlight the fragility of the peace we take for granted. We rely on the courtroom to transform the unimaginable into the manageable, to take the raw, bleeding chaos of a murder and distill it into a sanitized sentence. By failing to provide this, the Texarkana case leaves the listener, the investigator, and the citizen in a state of eternal waiting, hovering at the edge of a story that has no final page. The absence of a trial ensures that the monster never dies. He simply fades back into the woods, waiting, forever escaping the reach of the law that had so desperately hoped to pin him down. The silence of the courtroom, which began in the autumn of 1946, remains the defining sound of the Texarkana moonlight murders, a hollow, echoing silence that speaks louder than any judge's decree, ensuring that the mystery remains as potent, as terrifying, and as unresolved as it was on the night the first window shattered. The pursuit of the Phantom proved that while justice is the goal of our society, it is not always a guaranteed outcome, and sometimes the only thing left in the aftermath of terror is a lingering, haunting question that no amount of judicial process can ever hope to answer. The legacy of the Texarkana moonlight murders is not merely found in the cold, dusty pages of police archives or the faded clippings of newspapers that long ago yellowed in the Texas heat. Its true impact resides in the enduring, corrosive haunting of a community that was forced to reconcile its post-war idealism with the stark, brutal reality of an inexplicable evil. As the decades have peeled away, the figure of the Phantom Killer has been transformed from a terrifying contemporary threat into a permanent fixture of American dark folklore, a mythic construct that serves as a grim reminder of how fragile the veneer of civilization truly is. The trauma that the city endured in the spring of 1946 did not dissipate with the arrest of suspects or the closure of cases. Instead, it settled into the marrow of the town, creating a cultural scar that still aches whenever the moon rises high over the dense, silent pines of the borderlands. For the survivors, and for the generations that followed, The Phantom became a cautionary tale about the unpredictability of human darkness, a lesson that the places we believe to be safe are often the most exposed, and that the shadows we walk through at night are never truly as empty as we hope them to be. The cultural resonance of the case is undeniable, having permeated the very identity of Texarkana. For years, the city struggled with the weight of its own infamy, simultaneously wanting to move past the tragedy and remaining tethered to the mystery that brought it national attention. The movies, the books, and the endless speculative articles that have proliferated over the years have done little to soften the reality of the pain that was inflicted upon those families. They have, in a sense, turned the victims into symbols, stripping away the humanity of their lives in favor of the aesthetic of the thriller. This lopsided remembrance is a common affliction in the world of true crime, where the horror of the event often eclipses the memory of the individuals who were lost. Yet, in Texarkana, the memory remains raw, a persistent presence that reminds the locals that the ground they walk upon was once soaked in the blood of their own. It is a haunting that transcends the physical, a psychological inheritance passed down from parents to children who grew up hearing the whispers of the masked man and the stories of the nights when the city went dark in fear. Reflecting on the totality of these events, we are forced to grapple with the essential, uncomfortable truth that some questions in this world are not meant to have answers. The human mind is wired to seek patterns, to demand resolution, and to find comfort in the belief that justice is a linear progression from crime to punishment. But the Texarkana case defies this comfort. It is a jagged, broken arc that leaves the observer suspended in a state of eternal, agonizing inquiry. The Phantom Killer's escape from history, his disappearance into the void of the forest, acts as a permanent challenge to our arrogance. We believe that we can categorize and control our environment, that we can use our laws and our technology to map the furthest reaches of human malice, but the Phantom reminds us that there are predators who operate beyond the reach of our systems, who exist in the gaps between our institutions, and who can dismantle our peace of mind with a simplicity that is utterly terrifying. The mystery of his identity is not a failure of investigation. It is a manifestation of the inherent limitations of our pursuit of justice in a world that is not always fair, logical, or orderly. The lingering unease of the Texarkana case also forces a deeper reflection on the nature of fear itself. Fear is a powerful, transformative force. It can bond a community together, as it did in the desperate, vigilant months of 1946, and it can also hollow out the spirit of a city, turning its residents into captives of their own paranoia. When the threat is nameless and faceless, the fear becomes infinite, as it can be projected onto anyone or anything. The mask of the Phantom was, perhaps, his most potent weapon because it allowed him to become an idea rather than just a man. It transformed a killer into a projection of everything the citizens feared most: the loss of their children, the violation of their privacy, and the collapse of the moral order. This is why the legend persists. It isn't just about the murders. It is about the moment when the mask was first pulled on, and the darkness of the woods became an extension of the darkness in the human heart. As we look back, we must also return our focus to the victims. They were the ones who paid the price for the Phantom's disruption of reality, and their lives represent the true weight of the tragedy. Their stories, though fractured and incomplete, are the only things that truly matter in the face of such senseless loss. We owe it to them to remember that they were not just figures in a mystery. They were young people with loves, ambitions, and a belief in a future that was snatched from them in the cold, indifferent moonlight. To keep their memory alive is to reject the mythic allure of the killer and to focus instead on the reality of the tragedy. It is to acknowledge the pain that was left in the wake of the violence, and to respect the endurance of the families who had to go on living in a world that had been irrevocably dimmed by their absence. The Phantom may have claimed their lives, but he did not have the right to claim their legacy. Ultimately, the Texarkana moonlight murders stand as a testament to the fact that the darkness of the borderlands is not just a physical space, but a spiritual one, a place where the rules of our ordinary lives don't always apply, and where the echoes of the past remain trapped in the trees, waiting for someone to listen. The story of the Phantom is a story about the fragility of human security and the persistence of the unknown. It reminds us that we are all walking through our own versions of the woods, and that the shadows in our own lives are often more substantial than we are willing to admit. The mystery will likely never be solved, and in a way, that is the most honest conclusion possible. It is a monument to the unanswerable, a permanent hole in the fabric of our knowledge that serves to humble us. We are left with the silence of the moonlit roads, the memory of the breaking glass, and the enduring realization that some monsters never get caught. They simply fade away, leaving us to wonder, to fear, and to forever look over our shoulders into the dark, watching for a shape that we know, deep down, we might be better off never truly seeing. The case remains a dark, swirling center in the heart of the American true crime narrative, a story that refuses to die, refuses to be solved, and refuses to let us go, anchoring itself in the soil of Texas and Arkansas as a permanent, pulsing reminder that the light of the moon can be a dangerous thing, and that the deepest mysteries are the ones that keep us awake at night, wondering what is moving in the trees, just beyond the reach of our porch lights, forever waiting in the silence. The final reckoning of the Texarkana story is not found in a courtroom verdict or the eventual identification of a killer, but in the slow, persistent accumulation of time that turns a lived horror into a cultural myth. As we look at the aftermath of the 1946 tragedy, we see that the narrative has been reshaped by the hands of historians, storytellers, and the residents themselves, each layer of interpretation adding to the complexity of the legend. This process of myth-making serves as a psychological defense mechanism. By turning the Phantom into a character in a story, the community attempts to domesticate the terror, to contain the incomprehensible violence within the boundaries of a narrative arc that we can discuss, analyze, and even consume. Yet, the core of the case remains stubbornly resistant to such sanitization. The blood spilled in the dirt roads of Miller County and the surrounding Texas borderlands does not fade simply because the years have moved forward. It remains a stain on the landscape, a reminder that the transition from a wartime society to a peacetime one was not the smooth, golden restoration that the posters of the era promised. It was a period marked by profound anxiety, a hidden fragility that the Phantom exploited with a devastating lack of remorse. The reality of the Phantom's disappearance is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of his entire legacy. We are accustomed to stories where the villain is either caught, killed, or revealed to be a man with a motive we can understand, a crime of jealousy, greed, or long-standing resentment. But the Phantom suggests something far more alien and, therefore, more threatening, the existence of a predator whose violence was not a means to an end, but an end in itself. He operated with the detachment of a natural force, a whirlwind of cruelty that passed through Texarkana, left the town shattered, and then dissipated back into the atmosphere. This absence of a clear motivation forces us to confront the possibility that there are individuals who exist among us whose cruelty is fundamental rather than circumstantial. This is a terrifying prospect, one that challenges our optimistic belief in the inherent goodness of people and the restorative power of our social systems. The fact that he was never caught is not merely a failure of detective work. It is an indictment of our inability to fully account for the dark, chaotic possibilities of human nature. In the years following the investigation, the town of Texarkana underwent a transformation that was as much psychological as it was physical. The roads that had once been the quiet, romantic escapes of the youth were paved, widened, and integrated into the modern grid of the growing city. The lovers' lanes of 1946, those isolated pockets of privacy, were replaced by suburban developments, shopping centers, and the mundane infrastructure of a bustling, 21st-century community. Yet, for those who know the history, these locations retain a spectral quality. When one drives past the areas where the attacks took place, there's a lingering sense of weight to the air, a recognition that this ground holds the memory of violence. The physical geography has been overwritten, but the psychic geography remains intact, a map of trauma that persists beneath the surface of the modern city. The victims are still there, in a sense, anchored to the history of the ground, their absence a silent presence that dictates the way the community understands its own past. Furthermore, we must address the enduring impact on the families of the victims. For them, the story was never a legend to be discussed in podcasts or films. It was a devastatingly personal rupture that destroyed their peace and colored every day of their subsequent lives. The lack of a resolution meant that for decades, they were forced to wonder if the person who ruined their lives was still out there, living in a house down the street, shopping at the same grocery store, or even passing them on the sidewalk. This uncertainty is a particular form of torture, a psychological imprisonment that provides no release. They were the ones who had to navigate the grief in a town that was itself traumatized, a community that was watching them, waiting for them to move on even as it remained transfixed by the very event that had caused their ruin. The legacy of the Phantom is, above all else, the immense, quiet suffering of these individuals, a suffering that was never acknowledged by the catharsis of a public trial and that remains an unspoken, deeply private part of the city's history. As we conclude this exploration, we must acknowledge the limitations of our own curiosity. We return to these stories again and again, driven by a primal need to understand the inexplicable, to find safety in the telling of the tale. We want to believe that by dissecting the movements of the killer, by analyzing the failures of the police, and by cataloging the lives of the victims, we can somehow gain control over the terror. But the truth is that the Texarkana Moonlight murders offer no such control. They remain a stark, unblinking witness to the fact that violence can enter a life at any time, for no reason, and that the world is a far more unpredictable and dangerous place than we allow ourselves to believe. The story of the Phantom is a mirror held up to our own vulnerability, reflecting back the fear that we all carry in the dark, the fear that something might be waiting in the shadows of our own lives. The silence that fell over Texarkana in the summer of 1946 is still the dominant feature of this case. It is a silence that speaks of the profound disconnect between the suffering of the individuals and the broader history of the city. We have filled that silence with our theories, our books, and our endless questions, but the silence itself remains unbroken, the true witness to the events of that spring. The Phantom, whoever he was, a man, a monster, or a manifestation of the collective hysteria of a society in transition, has achieved a kind of immortality. He exists now not in the flesh, but in the architecture of our shared anxiety, a figure who will forever haunt the edge of our vision, reminding us that there is a darkness that cannot be mapped, a mystery that cannot be solved, and a terror that, once led into the world, never truly leaves it. We end where we began, looking out into the night, listening to the rustle of the trees, and wondering who is out there, what they are holding in their hands, and why they have chosen this moment to step out of the shadows. The story of the Texarkana Moonlight murders is the story of that eternal, aching question, a question that will continue to echo through the pines of the borderlands as long as there is a moon to light the way and a shadow to hide the truth. It is a haunting that has become our own, a piece of the darkness that we have adopted into our collective consciousness, an unsolved riddle that serves as a permanent, pulsing reminder that when the light of the moon hits the woods just right, the history of 1946 is never as far away as we hope it to be. The case of the Phantom Killer remains the quintessential American nightmare, a story that begins with a knock on the window and ends in a silence that will last forever. As we draw the final curtain on the harrowing chronicles of the 1946 Texarkana Moonlight murders, it is imperative to confront the lingering question of why this specific series of crimes has maintained such a visceral grip on the American psyche for nearly a century. The endurance of the Phantom Killer legend is not merely a product of the mystery itself, but a result of the way in which the events of that spring shattered the post-war American dream. At a time when the nation was collectively desperate to believe in the triumph of order, justice, and progress, the emergence of a faceless predator who could strike with impunity at the very heart of the community's social fabric acted as a systemic rupture. It forced a society that was attempting to rebuild its moral and domestic foundations to gaze into a mirror of absolute, unreasoning chaos. The Phantom did not just murder individuals. He murdered the illusion of a world governed by predictability and safety. By existing as a ghost in the machine of the legal system, by defying the combined might of local police and the Texas Rangers, and by vanishing without a trace, he achieved a paradoxical form of permanence. He is the shadow that reminds us that beneath the infrastructure of our modern lives, our paved roads, our telephone lines, and our social contracts, the primitive, unmapped woods of human malice remain, waiting to be traversed by those who know the paths. The psychological footprint of these events is permanently embedded in the landscape of Texarkana, turning a geography of promise into a geography of remembrance. To walk through the outskirts of the city, even today, is to walk through a site of historical weight, where the echoes of the 1946 panic still vibrate in the stillness of the trees. Every road that winds into the dense, pine-choked periphery of the city serves as a reminder of the fragility of the peace we often take for granted. The residents of Texarkana have learned to carry this history as a part of their identity, a somber acknowledgement that their hometown was once the stage for a nightmare that refused to be resolved. This is not a legacy to be cherished, but a legacy to be endured, a shared burden of memory that binds the community to the victims and to the unanswered questions that they left behind in the cold earth. The story serves as a permanent, pulsing reminder that the light of the moon can be a dangerous thing, and that the shadows cast by the trees on a summer night are never entirely empty. It is a cautionary tale that has transcended its origins, evolving into a fundamental element of the American true crime narrative that speaks to our collective vulnerability. When we consider the lives of the victims, Jimmy Hollis, Mary Jean Larry, Richard Griffin, Polly and Moore, Paul Martin, and Betty Jo Booker, we must strive to separate them from the mythic, masked figure who claimed them. They were not just instruments of the Phantom's depravity. They were people with their own unique interior lives, dreams, and futures that were stolen by a stroke of senseless violence. The tragedy of their deaths is compounded by the fact that they are often reduced to the role of the first victims or the final casualties in a grand, cinematic story. We must, in our reflection, prioritize the humanity of these individuals, acknowledging the profound and irreversible loss that their families had to navigate long after the news cycle moved on and the investigators left the state. Their existence was the reality that the Phantom sought to erase, and our refusal to let their stories be fully subsumed by the mystery is the only true form of justice we can offer them. Their lives were the stakes of the 1946 terror, and their memory remains the most poignant and the most neglected aspect of this entire, sprawling mystery. Furthermore, we must address the enduring, almost agonizing frustration felt by the generations of investigators and truth-seekers who have obsessively picked at the loose threads of this case. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders represent the ultimate challenge to the investigative spirit, a case that has been examined, re-examined, and dissected by experts and amateurs alike, yet remains stubbornly impervious to closure. It is the Everest of cold cases, a mountain of circumstantial evidence, contradictory testimonies, and atmospheric dread that has claimed the reputations and the peace of mind of countless researchers. The desire to solve this mystery is a reflection of the human need for symmetry, for the closing of the circle, and for the restoration of the natural order. We want to believe that there is a secret key that will unlock the truth, that there is a logical sequence of events waiting to be uncovered, but the Phantom resists our desire for order. He represents the existence of the unsolvable, the presence of a knot that cannot be untied, and a truth that has been permanently lost to the passage of time. Looking forward, the Phantom will continue to haunt the periphery of our cultural consciousness, manifesting in new iterations, new theories, and new generations of curiosity. We will continue to debate the identity of the man in the white mask. We will continue to scrutinize the patrol logs of the Texas Rangers, and we will continue to look out into the dark, wondering what we might see if we only had the courage to look long enough. This curiosity is not a flaw. It is a manifestation of our commitment to the pursuit of truth, even when the truth proves elusive. It is a commitment to the memory of the victims and a commitment to the vigilance that the Phantom's crimes have instilled in us. We look to the past not to find peace, but to understand the darkness that has always accompanied the light, a darkness that was vividly and tragically illuminated by the events of that spring. We learn from the terror, we grow through the grief, and we move forward with a heightened, sobering awareness of the fragility of our own existence. In the final analysis, The story of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders is a story about the intersection of the known and the unknown, the mundane and the monstrous, the present and the past. It is a story that refuses to be finalized, leaving us perpetually in the middle of a narrative that is as expansive and mysterious as the Texas-Arkansas borderlands themselves. We leave this tale behind, but we do not leave it solved. We carry it with us as a part of our shared understanding of the world, a dark gem that gleams with the reflection of our own deepest fears. The Phantom Killer is a ghost that will never rest, an entity that lives in the gaps of our records, the silences of our archives, and the whispers of the night. He is the reminder that some things are meant to remain in the shadows, and that the history of our world is often written in a language that we do not fully understand. We walk away from the Texarkana case, knowing that while we have searched every corner of the earth for the man in the white mask, he is perhaps best left to the silence of the woods, where the secrets of 1946 are buried, forever held by the trees and the wind, shielded from the judgment of the law and the scrutiny of the living, standing as an eternal, unsolvable enigma that will continue to challenge, frighten, and haunt us until the very end of time. The mystery is the legacy, and the legacy is the mystery, tied together in a knot of blood, moon, and shadow that will never be undone, leaving the citizens of Texarkana and the rest of the world to ponder the darkness that forever waits just beyond the porch light, a silent, faceless menace that never truly left, but only settled into the deep, dark silence of the history we call our own. To reach the true epicenter of the Texarkana enigma, one must venture beyond the mere chronology of the attacks and delve into the profound existential shift that the Moonlight Murders triggered within the American consciousness. The spring of 1946 was, in many ways, the precise moment when the post-war innocence of a nation was irrevocably stripped away, replaced by a sophisticated, gnawing paranoia that would define the decades to follow. Before the Phantom, crime in America was largely viewed through the lens of motive, robbery, passion, revenge, logical pathways that a society could grasp and, eventually, rectify through the judicial process. But the Phantom shattered this paradigm by introducing a form of violence that was entirely disconnected from the material world. He was not interested in the wallets of his victims, nor was he motivated by long-standing grudges that could be mediated or explained. He was a harbinger of the modern serial killer, a figure who operated within the internal logic of his own depravity, rendering the traditional tools of law enforcement and social control obsolete. This transformation in the nature of evil is perhaps the most significant, yet most overlooked, aspect of his legacy. He acted as the prototype for a new kind of boogeyman, one who didn't exist to profit from his crimes, but who existed solely to exert dominion over the vulnerable, turning the act of courtship into a theater of terminal consequence. When we consider the cultural response, we see a community struggling to translate a primal, visceral terror into a language that could be communicated. The newspapers of the time, in their attempt to report the facts, inadvertently helped to construct the myth of the Phantom, using descriptions like the Phantom Killer and the Moonlight Murders to package a chaotic series of events into a coherent, horrifying narrative. This was a necessary survival strategy. By naming the monster, the citizens of Texarkana felt they had, in some small way, taken back a measure of agency. Yet, this naming only served to amplify the legend, turning a man into a symbol that could be invoked in any dark hallway or on any lonely road. The mask, in particular, became the defining totem of this era. It was not merely a disguise, it was a psychological barrier, a way of erasing the humanity of the attacker while simultaneously erasing the humanity of the victims. To be confronted by a face that was nothing but a white bag with holes was to be confronted by a void, a realization that there was no human soul behind the violence, only a dark, mechanical force that sought to reduce the vibrancy of life into the stillness of death. This is why the image remains so potent today. It represents the absolute collapse of communication between the victim and the perpetrator. The role of the media in shaping this tragedy cannot be overstated. By focusing intensely on the lovers' lanes as the epicenter of the horror, the press inadvertently criminalized the innocent pursuit of companionship. This created a lasting psychological association between the act of intimacy and the threat of violence that persisted in the region for years. Teenagers were no longer encouraged to explore the fringes of their city. They were told to retreat into the safety of their homes, to bolt their doors, and to view the night with deep-seated suspicion. This shift in social behavior, while understandable given the context of the murders, fundamentally altered the character of the town. It fostered an environment where fear was the primary currency of interaction, where parents viewed their children's desire for independence as a dangerous risk, and where the community became inward-looking, suspicious of outsiders, and wary of the very environment that had once been their sanctuary. This was a victory for the Phantom. He had successfully reorganized the social order of Texarkana, turning a town that wanted to be open and celebratory into a town that was locked down and fearful. We must also contend with the haunting silence that defines the modern investigation of the case. In an era of advanced forensic science, where we can extract genetic truth from the smallest fragment of debris, the Texarkana case remains an infuriating vacuum. We have reached a point where the mystery is no longer about the perpetrator's identity, but about the failure of our own tools to pierce the veil of time. There is a melancholy beauty in this, a reminder that human existence is frequently punctuated by events that we are destined to never fully comprehend. The Phantom exists in the gaps of our knowledge, an immutable fact of history that resists every attempt at resolution. He serves as a mirror for our own limitations, showing us that even with all of our technology, our intelligence, and our collective will, we are still prone to being defeated by the simple, brutal fact of an unexplained mystery. This humbling realization is, perhaps, the most important lesson we can draw from the spring of 1946, that some wounds do not heal, some questions do not have answers, and some darkness is simply meant to remain in the shadows, unmapped and untouchable. Reflecting on the totality of the Texarkana narrative, we see that it is not a singular event, but a continuous, unfolding history. The murders happened in 1946, but the Phantom continues to operate in the present day as a subject of inquiry, a character in a story, and a source of dread. He is a living presence in the archival records, in the memories of the descendants of the victims, and in the dark corner of the American imagination where our deepest fears reside. To keep studying this case is not to obsess over the macabre, but to acknowledge the profound way in which the past shapes our understanding of the present. The tragedy of Texarkana is a piece of the architecture of our current society, a foundational trauma that reminds us that we are all walking the same roads, underneath the same moon, and that the history of our nation is not just a story of triumph, but a story of the quiet, brutal moments where we were forced to face the reality of our own vulnerability. We are the inheritors of this history, and it is our responsibility to walk through it with a sense of compassion for those who are lost and a sense of humility before the mysteries that we have not yet solved. In the final analysis, the story of the Phantom is the story of the threshold. He stood at the threshold of a new era of crime. He stood at the threshold of the woods that separated the town from the void, and he stood at the threshold of our consciousness, demanding to be recognized for the terror he represented. We have tried for decades to push him back across that threshold, to name him, to capture him, and to put him behind bars, but he remains a persistent, hovering question mark in the center of our cultural record. As we close the book on these events, we are left with the realization that the Phantom is not a figure who can be contained by the simple act of finishing a narrative. He is an echo that will continue to reverberate, a reminder that the world is a place of profound complexity, where the light of progress is always shadowed by the reality of human malice. We leave him in the woods of Texarkana, in the dark, in the silence, and in the history that we will continue to tell, generation after generation, as long as there is an ear to listen and a heart to feel the weight of the mystery. The Moonlight Murders were not just a series of crimes. They were a singular, cataclysmic moment that changed the way we perceive the night, the way we perceive our neighbors, and the way we perceive the darkness that exists, silent and watchful, just beyond the reach of the porch light, waiting for the moon to rise one more time over the borderlands, forever keeping its secrets close, wrapped in the cold, white shroud of a mask that will never, ever be unraveled. The finality of the Texarkana story is found not in the arrival of justice, but in the inevitable acceptance of the infinite. For 9 parts, we have walked the jagged perimeter of this 1946 nightmare, tracing the footsteps of a predator who transformed the simple act of courtship into a terminal hazard and left an entire community reeling in the wake of his inexplicable cruelty. Now, as we stand at the threshold of the conclusion, we must recognize that the Texarkana Moonlight Murders are not a tragedy that can be neatly archived or filed away. Instead, they represent a permanent fracture in the American identity, a moment when the optimism of the post-war era was confronted by a darkness so absolute that it could not be assimilated, analyzed, or overcome. To speak of this case is to speak of a wound that does not heal, a piece of the past that refuses to stay buried in the dirt roads of Miller County. We have dissected the mechanics of the Phantom's violence, we have cataloged the failures of the jurisdictional authorities, and we have mourned the lives that were so abruptly extinguished, yet we are left with the crushing realization that the core of this mystery remains as untouchable as a star in the night sky. The Phantom is not a man we can arrest. He is an atmospheric condition, a lingering presence that has become synonymous with the darkness that lives on the fringes of our modern, illuminated lives. The enduring power of this narrative lies in its refusal to offer the comfort of a resolution. We are drawn to true crime because we seek the satisfaction of the narrative arc, the crime, the pursuit, the capture, and the finality of the courtroom. The Texarkana case denies us this catharsis. It is a story of open endings, of questions that multiply the more we investigate, and of a predator who successfully navigated the boundaries of human law to claim his victims and then simply ceased to exist. This defiance of our conventional storytelling structures is what makes the Phantom so uniquely terrifying. He didn't just escape the police. He escaped the very laws of human narrative. He exists as an anomaly, a glitch in the history of the borderlands that reminds us that there are forces at work in this world that do not care for our need for order or our demand for retribution. This lack of resolution is the most honest aspect of the story, serving as a bleak mirror to the chaotic and often senseless nature of human suffering. We look at the 1946 archives and we see our own desperate need for truth reflected back at us, an echo of the panic that once held the city in its icy grip. As we move forward, the legend of the Phantom will continue to evolve, picking up new meanings and interpretations with every passing generation. He will be seen as a precursor to the modern serial killer, as a manifestation of the collective trauma of the war, and as a mythic figure who serves to keep the darkness at bay. This is the nature of the enduring mystery. It allows us to project our own current anxieties onto the canvas of the past. When we talk about the Phantom today, we are often talking about our own fears, about the isolation of the modern world, the anonymity of the perpetrator, and the feeling that we are constantly being watched by forces we cannot see or understand. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders provide the vocabulary for this fear, a shared language that allows us to discuss the unspeakable and to acknowledge the reality that the world is a far more fragile and dangerous place than we admit in our lighter, more ordinary moments. The mystery is not just about a series of deaths in 1946. It is about the eternal presence of a shadow that we must all learn to live with, even if we can never hope to truly conquer it. Reflecting on the survivors and the families of the victims, we see the true cost of this unresolved history. They are the ones who have lived with the persistent, gnawing question of who could do such a thing and why it was allowed to happen. They are the ones who have had to endure the endless retelling of their pain, the voyeuristic gaze of the true crime community, and the ongoing, agonizing absence of a name to attach to their grief. Their resilience is a testament to the human capacity to survive the impossible, to carry the weight of an unsolved tragedy without losing the ability to move forward. We owe it to them to approach this story not with the thrill of the hunt, but with the solemnity of the witness. We must remember that behind the mask of the Phantom and the headlines of the newspapers, there were people whose lives were shattered by a violence that remains, to this day, entirely unpunished. To honor them is to acknowledge the pain that never found its resolution, the grief that never reached its conclusion, and the silence that remains as the only true monument to the tragedy they were forced to endure. Ultimately, the story of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders is a story about the fragility of human memory. We collect the fragments, we piece together the timelines, and we build our theories, but we are always fighting against the tide of time, which seeks to wash away the details and blur the lines between reality and myth. The phantom is an entity that exists in the interstices of our memory, a figure who is sustained by the very questions we refuse to stop asking. He is the spirit of the woods, the voice in the wind, and the sound of the shattering glass that we hear in our dreams. He is the ultimate, unsolved riddle of the American borderlands, a mystery that will remain locked in the vault of history, protected by the passage of time and the impossibility of finding a truth that has long since turned to dust. As we finally close the files and turn away from the dark pines of Miller County, we are left with the chilling knowledge that the night remains, the woods remain, and the secret remains, a permanent, immovable truth that sits at the center of our cultural consciousness, waiting for the moon to rise, and waiting for someone, somewhere, to step out of the shadows once again. We leave Texarkana behind, but we do not leave the mystery behind. It has become a part of the air we breathe, a shadow that follows us into the sunlight of our own lives. We have walked the path of the phantom, we have stood at the sight of the blood-stained cars, and we have stared into the empty, white-eyed mask of the unknown, and through it all, we have been reminded of the immense, profound fragility of the things we love. The Moonlight Murders are a testament to the fact that we are all, in some sense, living on the edge of a great, dark forest, where the rules of our ordinary world do not necessarily apply, and where the things we fear the most are often the things that we are destined to never fully understand. We have explored the limits of our knowledge, and in doing so, we have come to a place of quiet, humbled acceptance. The phantom is not a man to be caught, but a mystery to be carried, a burden of history that we share as a community of the living, forever looking over our shoulders, forever listening for the sound of a snapping twig, and forever holding on to the hope that, in the end, the light will be enough to keep the shadows at bay. The story is finished, yet it is never truly over, for as long as there is darkness, the mystery of 1946 will continue to pulse in the background of our lives, a silent, faceless, and eternal enigma that stands as the ultimate sentinel at the edge of our known world, watching, waiting, and forever holding the truth in the cold, still silence of the past. The finality of a story, particularly one as entrenched in the bedrock of American trauma as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, is a deceptive concept. We have traversed the winding, red dirt roads of Miller County. We have dissected the cold, clinical methodology of an unknown predator, and we have lived within the suffocating atmosphere of a city under siege. Yet to claim that this narrative can reach a definitive conclusion is to misunderstand the nature of the haunting. The Phantom Killer is not merely a subject of historical interest. He is an atmospheric element that has been permanently integrated into the landscape of the borderlands. He is the rustle in the pines that makes a driver accelerate past a parked car on a lonely road. He is the lingering skepticism in the eyes of those who hear the official version of events and know, deep down, that there is an essential truth hidden beneath the layers of bureaucratic silence. To arrive at this 11th and final movement of our exploration is to acknowledge that the pursuit of truth is not a destination, but a state of perpetual engagement with the unknown, a process of keeping the memory of the victims alive while staring into the abyss of a mystery that offers no relief and no final verdict. The reality of 1946 remains a visceral presence in the collective consciousness of Texarkana, a ghost that refuses to be exorcised by the mere passage of 80 years. The city has grown, the infrastructure has modernized, and the faces of the residents have changed, yet the phantom remains a constant, silent spectator. When we contemplate the absence of an ending, we must realize that the story has achieved a form of immortality that transcends the reach of any court or investigative agency. By remaining unsolved, the case has become a canvas upon which every subsequent generation paints its own anxieties. We have moved from the genuine, raw panic of the post-war era to the analytical, detached fascination of the digital age, yet the core of the enigma, the simple, brutal fact of an unexplained violence, remains identical. This persistence is a testament to the way in which true horror operates. It does not require a resolution to be effective. The terror of the phantom lies precisely in his refusal to be categorized, in his decision to remain a shadow in the woods rather than a face in a booking photograph. He is the ultimate, untouchable adversary, and his victory is cemented by the fact that we are still talking about him, still looking for him, and still allowing him to dictate the terms of our fear. In considering the humanity of the victims, we find the most profound reason to continue this inquiry. We must remember that they were not merely the objects of a serial predator. They were vibrant, hopeful individuals whose lives were truncated at the very moment they were preparing to bloom. The tragedy of their loss is not lessened by the passage of time. It is only magnified by the silence that has followed them. We bear a witness to their memory by refusing to let the horror of their final moments define their entire existence. We honor them by refusing to let the mystery of their deaths become a mere curiosity, a footnote in the history of the American dark. The memory of Jimmy, Mary Jean, Richard, Polly, Paul, and Betty Jo is the true heartbeat of this story, the human element that prevents the narrative from devolving into the purely academic. Their families, their friends, and the community that was forced to grow up in the shadow of their loss deserve a narrative that centers on the restoration of their humanity, even when the justice they were owed remains elusive and distant. As we look toward the future, the Texarkana case serves as a sober reminder of the fragility of our social contracts and the unpredictability of human nature. We have built a world that prizes the acquisition of knowledge, the application of logic, and the triumph of the institutionalized order, yet we are constantly confronted by the reality that there are spaces in this world where such things do not hold sway. The Phantom reminds us that evil does not always follow a pattern that we can map, and that violence does not always leave a trail of breadcrumbs for us to follow. We are forced to exist in a world that is not always orderly, a world that is punctuated by sudden, inexplicable jolts of darkness. This acceptance is not an act of surrender, but an act of maturity. We learn to navigate the night, we learn to carry the weight of our questions, and we learn to move forward even when the answers we crave remain locked away in the vault of the unrecoverable past. We do not stop searching, but we begin to search with a different set of expectations. Not for the final, clean answer, but for the depth of understanding that comes from acknowledging the complexity of the human experience. The mystery of the Phantom, then, is not a failure of our ability to know. It is a feature of the world we inhabit. It is the friction between our desire for closure and the inherent chaos of existence. We are the inheritors of this mystery, and it falls upon us to maintain the integrity of the story, to ensure that it is told with the gravity, the respect, and the relentless, searching spirit that it demands. We do not need the mask to be ripped away to recognize the reality of the horror, the impact on the town, the grief of the families, and the long, lingering shadows of 1946 are evidence enough. The Phantom has been unmasked in the only way that truly matters. He has been revealed as the embodiment of our darkest vulnerability, the force that forces us to look inward at the architecture of our own fear. As we finally turn away from the woods of Texarkana, we do so with a deeper sense of empathy and a sharper awareness of the thin, precarious line that separates the safety of our porch lights from the vast, unknown reaches of the forest. We carry the Texarkana story with us not as a solved case, but as a permanent, pulsing question that defines the boundaries of our knowledge. It is a mystery that has survived the transition of empires, the advance of technology, and the steady, eroding march of the centuries. It is a story that refuses to be silenced, and in that refusal, it finds its eternal life. We leave it now to the annals of history, to the archives that will continue to collect the theories, and to the researchers who will continue to walk the ground. But we know, deep within our souls, that the truth is something that will always reside in the silence, hidden by the very geography that witnessed the start of the nightmare. The Phantom is not gone. He has simply become a part of the history of the borderlands, a permanent, hovering entity that reminds us of the fragility of the peace we guard so jealously. As the moonlight hits the pines and the shadows lengthen across the red dirt roads, we are reminded once more that there are secrets in this world that are never meant to be disclosed, truths that are meant to be kept by the land itself, and stories that are never truly finished, but only paused in the cold, unblinking eyes of the past. The legacy of 1946 is the mystery of 1946, a knot that will never be undone, a story that will never be closed, and a haunting that will continue to echo as long as there is an ear to listen to the sound of the wind moving through the trees, telling the tale of the man in the white mask who walked out of the darkness, claimed the night, and then returned to the silence from whence he came, leaving us to forever wonder, forever wait, and forever look into the dark, watching for the shape that we know. In our most quiet, most honest moments, we were never meant to find.